Dear listeners, I have so much to tell you, and I often don't know where to start. It seems the world doesn't want to admit that sometimes we make mistakes and that sometimes the wrong person gets punished for something they didn't do. Not all of us have been personally affected, but many of us have been impacted by this reality. And I feel like it's my responsibility to share these stories with you and to tell you what I've learned about wrongful convictions. Welcome back to Wrongfully Yours. Today, I am so honored to be joined by documentarian Jia Rizvi. She's a filmmaker known for her unflinching and deeply human approach to telling stories that matter. Jia's built a reputation for creating powerful, thought provoking films that challenge perspectives and amplify unheard voices. Whether she's tackling issues of justice, identity, or resilience, her work reflects a deep empathy and an unwavering commitment to truth. In previous episodes, we've heard the powerful and heartbreaking journey of Jeff Deskovic, a young man who is wrongfully convicted at the age of 16 and exonerated after 16 years in prison. And he's now a fierce advocate for justice. Today, we're looking at that story through a different lens, literally. Gia spent years documenting the life and work of Jeff Deskovic, whose wrongful conviction and eventual exoneration after 16 years sparked national conversations around justice reform. Through her lens, Gia brings not only Jeff's journey to light, but also the emotional weight, systemic failures, and hard won hope that come with it. Today, we'll talk about what drew her to Jeff's story, the challenges of documenting such personal trauma, and the responsibility that comes with telling someone else's truth. We'll also explore how documentary filmmaking can be a powerful tool for justice and what she hopes audiences will take away from her work. This is a conversation about storytelling, the impact of the stories that demand to be told, and the lens through which we see the world. I am so excited to have the opportunity to speak with you because Jeff Deskovic told me all about your work on his case, which is what led me to contact you. So I'm hoping that, you have some interesting insight on what it's like to work on the other side of a wrongful conviction, and you can share with us what it's like to work through it from that angle. But before we jump in, maybe you can just kind of give us a quick overview of you and your work and what led you to the world of wrongful conviction in the first place.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, first, thanks for having me on. I so appreciate it. I had a background for a long time, over a decade, in marketing and communications and sales development. And one day I listened to the Serial podcast and was completely incensed by Adnan Syed's
Mm.
story on there. And, the whole world was entertained, and as was I. But then I was like, this kid got ripped out of his parents' home in the middle of the night at 4 a.m. or something like that, and never came back home. And we're listening to a story, years later, and he's still in prison. And so I thought I wanted to help him. That family was Pakistani, as is mine. And so I could really relate to his upbringing and the stories they shared about him in school and the mosque and stuff. And so really related to it. And I have two brothers that he reminded me a lot of, which really, really got me. And so I started advocating for his innocence, and I organized the very first in person fundraiser for his legal defense.
Oh, wow.
And I created free Anon shirts, and they went viral all over the world, and I donated the money from that. And so that's kind of how I got into wrongful convictions. And
Amazing.
yeah, it was awesome. And then when I did that first fundraiser I was telling you about, my friend introduced me to Jeff Deskovic and was like, "Do you want to meet somebody who has a similar story? He might be a great speaker for you." And I met Jeff, and it was uncanny how their stories were almost identical. Like in school, a girl they kind of knew, or well knew, was murdered, and it got pinned on them, and they didn't do it, and they were both so young. So it was really, really crazy to me when I met Jeff, because it was almost the exact same story. And then Jeff spoke at my fundraiser, and we became friends ever since.
That's amazing. And it's true. It's amazing how, even though every wrongful conviction case is unique in its own case, it's amazing how many threads you can kind of weave through
Yes.
each of the cases, right? Like that there are these striking similarities. And when you hear one case for the first time, like you with
Yes, yeah.
Adnan's case, and you're thinking, oh my goodness, this is absolutely bananas. There's no way, because I
Yeah.
think this is a general feeling when you're first introduced to a wrongful conviction. But then you meet Jeff and you think, oh my goodness, you have so many parallels. Like,
Yeah.
what does that say about the world that we live in? Like,
Yeah, for sure.
it,
It
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 just,
it's scary actually,
it
because
is. It's just I know for me, like I started over 20 years ago into this world and it was the same thing. Like the first case that I heard of, I was just like, "Oh my God, this can't even be real life." And, you know, set out to find out if there was other stuff like this and, sadly there was, and here I am 20 plus years later still learning about other cases that are out there. Like it's
yeah.
just crazy. So you were introduced to Jeff and you decided to do a documentary on his case. What was it about his case that you felt needed to be told?
You know, what's funny about that is, well, wrongful convictions in general, I felt like the average person doesn't think that they are a major issue in our country, and the average person is just unaware, to be honest. And because of that, it's also not a cause that a lot of people feel like they need to get behind, like things like homelessness or, hunger or war. It's like you see it, right? You see it online. And so it's very apparent. This one is kind of very quiet and hidden, and there's also trial by media, so people will see a story on the news and they'll be like, "Oh, if that person got arrested, they must have done something," and you just believe what you see in the news, and so there's this added layer of I felt like there had to be more awareness brought to this cause because most people don't think it's an issue. And so Jeff's case, what's interesting is that it's not that there was something particular about his case, it was the fact that Jeff was the only human being that I knew at that point in time personally that had that lived experience. And you know what's crazy about this is today I know about 40 to 50 people personally who are wrongfully convicted or who were wrongfully convicted. But at the time, he was the only one. So he was the only one I had that access to. So when I went to
Okay.
film school, I called him and I was like, "Hey, can I film you and tell your story?" And he said yes. And so I started, filming him and interviewing him, because I had access to him, really.
Right. So
Yeah.
it wasn't so much his case as just the idea of wrongful conviction in general that you felt needed to be told.
That's right. That's right. And, Adnan's case was so like I was incensed by it. And then Jeff had the same story. The difference was that Jeff was out when I met him. So thank
Sure.
goodness. But Adnan was still in. And so I wanted to tell the story of somebody who's currently incarcerated, hoping that we could draw some attention and help them. But then when I filmed Jeff, I'll never forget it. The very first day I came into his living room at his house and I started filming. And I had a set of interview questions and I started interviewing him. And I had this overwhelming feeling within the first 5 minutes that I was in the right place, doing the right thing, like, finally, I was just doing what I meant to be doing. It really like, I felt it come over me, and from that moment forward, I was like, "Oh, this is just definitely what I'm gonna do," and part of that is because, the work is really fulfilling, and part of that was because Jeff was just so open. He was such an open book, like, there wasn't a single thing that was off the record that I couldn't ask him, and when I did ask him, I got very, very truthful answers. I often say it's kind of funny because Jeff will answer some of the toughest questions in the most casual manner, almost like he's telling you what he's eating for lunch, And for somebody
Yes.
like me who was new to this world back then, this was almost 10 years ago. I met him 10 years ago. I guess we started filming more like 6 years ago, but back then I was so new to this world, and it was jarring to hear some of the things he was saying in the manner that he was saying them, and now I've gotten to know him, and I've asked him about that, and he says that it was such a horrific experience that he almost feels like he's talking about somebody else because he has to disassociate, like, it's the trauma, I'm sure. Um,
100%.
so now I understand it, but at the time, I was very fascinated as to how someone does that because I definitely don't have that ability to talk about personal things or traumatic things in my life in that manner at all, or to talk about them, period, let
I was
alone
going
in
to
that
say
manner.
to talk about them at all, let alone head on and detailed. And as much as he's saying he feels like he's talking about somebody else, when you speak to him, he's so sincere.
Yeah,
Like, so
yeah,
he's got this sincerity that he's divulging his trauma and his personal experiences. And, every exoneree that I know, I say, you are a far better person than I could ever be
I always say the
because,
same thing. Yes,
they just, the way that they overcome and they channel their trauma and they, work to just be the change they want to see.
yes.
It's unbelievable. And I don't know that I could have an open and honest and candid conversation without starting to spew vitriol at some point. Like, I just have this anger. I'm sure I just, maybe the whole experience changes you. I don't want to learn firsthand if
Right.
that's true or not.
Yeah.
I don't, I'm not tempting um, the universe on that one. Um, so, and I love, just going back to what you were saying earlier, I love what you're saying about how wrongful convictions is something that the general public doesn't have a general awareness about, because
Mhm.
I absolutely agree with you. It's not like homelessness or opioid crisis or mental health problems that you see right in front of you in
Yes.
your daily life. And so I guess it's how do we move the needle? How do we impress on people that this is a real thing and it is a real problem and it does affect people?
Well, for me, that's why I was actually this whole idea came to me when I was on a train or bus ride, I can't remember, from Adnan's post-conviction hearing back in
Okay,
Baltimore back to New York. And in the courtroom, I saw so much corruption and just so many things that just weren't right. And I remember thinking, what more can I do to help these people? Because one fundraiser for one person, doesn't even raise enough money because legal defense costs so much. First of all, not even
sure.
nearly enough money. And second of all, it's just helping one person. And there's so many people in this position. And at the time, Making a Murder and The Jinx were huge on TV. And I remember thinking, well, millions of people watch those shows. It's movies that will like really get people. And so to me, that was the answer for me. I really looked at what skill set do I have? I'd been a photographer for over a decade. I knew my way around a camera. So I thought, how can I use the skills I have to lend itself to this cause? And so I thought, that I could learn videography pretty easily and that would be something I could do. So I came home and enrolled into film school. And I think it works because people don't want what I found when I was even organizing the fundraiser for Adnan, people don't want to be hounded. They don't want to be asked for money because that happens every day, right? And
Absolutely.
right for every cause and everything and
And
online.
everybody's kid who is in school doing a
Yes.
readathon or
Fundraisers and yes, all of it, all the time, right? It's just not something people respond well to, right? And
yep.
when I was advocating for non, like we did an event. It was an event and it was local bands. And so it was like a fun night. And still it was hard to get people to show up.
Sure.
And so I remember that. And so I thought films is something people watch when they're at home to fill their, quiet time, their free time. And then if they're moved by what they saw, then they have this personal thing ignited in them to want to do something. And it's not me asking them to do anything. It's not anybody asking them to even give anything, money or time. Instead, it's something that they'll start to care about. And I've seen it happen time and time again, screening after screening. When people watch the film online, the messages I get, I see it all the time, and it works. That works, and for me, that was a good way to get people bought into the cause.
I love that so much. Can you just speak a little bit more when you're saying you see it time and time again? Because this is my big thing is that, I want to raise awareness and I want to stir people's passions. I teach at the university and, my students are always, and these are legal studies and criminology students. They're the ones who are supposed to know about this kind of stuff
Right.
and they're blown away by it. So it's like if these are people who've been studying this for 4 years are like having
Yes.
their minds blown by this, then obviously it translates to the general public. So, what are some of the reactions that you've seen?
Oh my God. I've had one person tell me that after watching Conviction, that they wanted to actually not switch careers, but to add an element to the work they already do to actually help people that are wrongfully convicted, whether it be to start a podcast or to interview them or just to shed a light and donate money, which is huge because like when I asked people, they didn't wanna do it, but after watching the film, they do it on their own, which
Absolutely.
is nice. Um, what else? I mean, on one side, I get so many heartfelt messages about how moved they were, and people cry all the time, which is tough to see. But on the other side, I get so many messages from families who are like, I have a family member who's been incarcerated, and I
Mm.
couldn't can't talk to anyone, can't tell anyone, but I would love you to just take a look at it and tell me what you think. And they send me files and photos and over
Oh,
email
wow.
all the time. All the time I get those. Which, is great in a way because I'm happy to talk to them and, be
Sure.
an ear and stuff. On the flip side, I always have this little bit of guilt because you can't make movies take years to make. They take tons of money to make. I can't make 10
Yes.
films. I can't, and I'm just one person that's doing indie films. It's not like I have a huge production company or something. I can be like, oh yeah, let's make these 10 movies. So I feel bad because I don't want to give anyone false hope either. So sometimes when I get these messages, they stay in my inbox for a while because I don't
Sure.
have the words. I don't know what to say. I don't wanna give false hope, and I don't wanna not reply, and so that happens too. So there's the good and the kind of kind of
And
bad.
then do you get any from the other side? As in, do you get anybody from, like, the justice system side
You
telling
know
you, like, "What are you doing?"
No, I've never gotten
That's
that.
so good.
I haven't gotten that, but to be fair, I told the story of Jeff who's been exonerated. So, right? It's kind of proven already. I mean, it is proven. If
Sure.
somebody wants to deny it, they're actually denying DNA evidence and stuff, right?
Yes.
So I haven't had that. But what I have had, which has been really rough, is um some of the exonerees I know that I spend time with and go to conferences with and, post photos with, I have had victims' families write to me and say, "Do you know this
Oh,
person did such and such to my family?" Because they still believe that the person is guilty, even though they're not. It's been proven that they're not, but they're married to that narrative because it's the trauma they
and
went through.
sadly, it's so common,
It's so
right?
common. It's so common.
And I was, speaking with others at the conference and just in my line of work and whatnot, and it's so common that you have people who have spent however many years thinking that this case is closed
That's right.
to then have the justice system throw it out and say, "Oh, sorry, we made a mistake," and now your closed case is a cold case. And we don't have any leads to follow. We don't
Right.
have anybody we want to look at, question, consider what, right? And
Yes.
so now the family of the original victim, they're being re-traumatized. There's so many layers of trauma and hurt that go on
Mhm.
with wrongful convictions. And, it's interesting that even from your perspective, just trying to tell a narrative that you're getting this kind of feedback from
Yes,
families.
it's so common, it's crazy, and it makes sense because from a psychological standpoint, you're re-traumatizing. First of all, a wrongful conviction creates an additional victim that was never
Sure.
there in the initial crime, which is so sad. And
Yep.
then when you get it wrong and then it eventually gets corrected, now the victim's family is being re-victimized and the trauma and the wounds reopen. And there's a psychology behind wanting that finality because they had to make their peace with whatever happened to their family member. And now
Yes.
you're asking them to reopen all those wounds, which is really, really tough. So I can see where they're coming from and why. But it's just really sad because it's another layer of just heartbreak in the whole wrongful conviction space.
100%. And in so many of these cases, because the justice system does not move quickly,
Mhm.
that they've held on to this belief that that is the guilty party
Yeah.
for 10, 15, 20, 30 years, right?
Yep.
And then all of a sudden it's like, "Oh, actually, no, it's not."
That's
And
right.
it's just wounds are reopened absolutely, and any potential healing that they had is now permanently disrupted.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. So I notice we are just about at time, and this has been such a great conversation that I'm hoping you will come back and join me again next week because I'd love to talk to you a little bit more about your work on Jeff's documentary and just your work in general as you tell the stories of exonerees.
Yes, I would love to. Thank you.
I can't thank Gia enough for taking the time to speak with me today. I think what she shared really speaks to the heart of what this podcast is all about. She's helping to shine a light on the quiet injustices that far too many people still don't see. Her journey from listener to advocate to filmmaker reminds us that we all have skills that we bring to the table. And sometimes the most unexpected paths lead us exactly where we're supposed to be. As we heard today, wrongful convictions don't just affect the individual. It's a ripple effect that touches families, communities, and the very integrity of our justice system. But stories, when told with heart, courage, and honesty, can change minds. They can move people from indifference to action. I am so grateful to Jia for being so open with me today, and I hope you'll join us next week when we continue this conversation and dive deeper into her work on Jeff Deskovic's documentary and what it really takes to tell these powerful stories. Until then, remember, behind every statistic is a story, and every story deserves to be heard. And while today's letter may have piqued your interest, this is only part of the story. There's still so much more to tell. The effects of wrongful convictions are far reaching. They touch us all. I'll write to you again soon as I continue my conversations with those whose lives have been impacted by a wrongful conviction. But until then, I remain wrongfully yours. If you have something that you want to talk about with me, or even if you want to just send me some words of encouragement, you can drop me a line at wrongfullyyourspodcast@gmail.com. You can also check out my website, kellylozon.ca, for more information about me and the kinds of things that I do. And if today's episode resonated with you, please consider sharing it with others, liking and following the podcast on your favorite platforms so you don't miss what comes next. And as always, thank you for listening to Wrongfully Yours, where we believe that telling these stories is the first step towards preventing the next injustice. And until next time, stay curious, stay hopeful, and keep fighting for justice.